One thing I've noticed a lot in the West is that we always try to become like teenagers or become younger again. Everyone doesn't seem to want to accept their age. One thing I noticed is that if you look at a lot of men, they will shave their face, and a man looks surprisingly younger if he shaves his face. If you look at a man in his 20s, you'd think, oh, well, that's a young man. That's just people almost think that they're not even, you're not even an adult if you're in your 20s nowadays, especially as a man. But if that young man grows a beard, he looks old, especially if you're in your later 20s and you have a beard, you look a lot older. And if you shave it, you look a lot younger. So I think we're just not used to that. And there's actually a reverse thing with women. Hormonal birth control greatly ages women, and they use a lot of makeup, probably because they've disrupted their hormones and health and all this, and it ends up making them look a lot older actually. So there's almost a strange paradox where women try to make themselves look older, which is actually a bad strategy, and then men try to make themselves look younger, which again is almost like a paradoxical strategy. It's a strategy almost for like short term, being very immature, mentally at least. I guess it's just kind of strange because the West is we're the most developed technologically and even like politically, I guess socially to an extent. Because of that, we've gone away from tradition, traditional family values, the things that essentially worked, and these like pillars that held up society, and we just didn't really question them. And now we've kind of like poked at them and said, well, maybe we could take them away. And it's like the roof has fallen societally. Now, this expands where one thing I've thought is that body type is actually cyclical over eras, I guess, of time. Recently, we are in the spring era, so the beginning of the new cycle, and you'll notice a lot of people are obsessed with the GLP-1 peptides, and these make you thinner. From what I understand, it works off is it your liver and your stomach or something. It makes you feel full already, so people don't eat as much. Now, if you have ever fasted, you'll notice that you get thin very quickly. It's probably the quickest way to get thin. And that's the kind of thinness that a model or a fighter who has to cut down water weight, there's a certain thinness where like your abdominals start to show, and your fasting will get you that. And I don't recommend it. I don't think it, unless you are like very fat and like just obese and overweight, fasting usually isn't actually the answer, at least in my opinion and experience. Actually, it's beginning to see a lot of people thin down, and that's cyclically in this era we are in the thin body type. And the thin body type is what are people who are thin? They're younger, right? People who are fatter or more muscular are actually older, because it takes time to accumulate that. Now, this is an interesting thing that I've found out recently. I always found as a man, exercising and putting on muscle was like the easiest way to essentially masculinize yourself. You'll notice that races that have a lot of natural testosterone will put on muscle without doing anything. This is kind of debatable because some people say, just say like people who take steroids, for example, they just seem to have a very muscular physique, even if they don't do exercise. And that's debated, of course, in the health community. I don't recommend you do that, of course, but there are definitely examples of that. So inherently, we can now see that testosterone, if it is high in a man, it will cause him to just have muscles and have muscular development. Just seems to grow the muscles, even if they don't work out. Now, if you do work out and you force your body to grow muscles, I believe that it does increase the testosterone. So it's this cyclical thing where if you grow more muscles, your body will produce more testosterone naturally, and then because it produces more naturally, you will retain that muscle naturally. Because if someone stops taking testosterone, then they put all they drop a lot of the muscle mass. And actually, because they're in a hypergonadal state, even if they do the PCT, the post cycle therapy, they still have this kind of look, this really thin. Their sides of the body is very thin. So what's going to happen when people stop taking the GLP-1? They're probably going to get fat again. Now, I always wondered, what is the opposite for women? Because I thought, well, geez, if there's this amazing thing called exercise and men can just do it and it just seemingly fixes like most of your issues as a man, because it, and masculinizes, makes you put on muscle and all this stuff, what can women do, right? Because it's like, if you're a man and you didn't get masculinized through your teenage years, and now you're facing a world which is too difficult for you, you now have this thing to do which can help you. And I hypothesized the other day that fat is actually what feminizes women, and that an increase in feminine hormones increases fat. Now, I looked this up, and apparently that progesterone, which ironically enough, a lot of the rapey people are taking, progesterone, I think estrogen, actually increase fat in a woman, and having more fat supposedly will increase these hormones. So it's kind of funny. It's like because society has demonized being fat.
I don't mean being like severely obese or like really fat, but I mean there's a healthy amount of fat that you can have and still be functional.
Even though, you look at America, it's a very fat country. The West in general, like there's very fat countries, right? But we've kind of demonized fatness in favor of like the bodybuilder build, which is a big upper body, but neglected core and neglected lower body, right? Which again symbolizes that the West in general neglects the root, because the way I see it is that the West is, there was the idea of the four people, the four races: the white race, the red race, the yellow race, and the brown or black race. And obviously, each of these are going to relate to different elements, different archetypes. And the Western people are just very positive, very intellectual. White, maybe we can think white being related to Chinese medicine's metal element. It's very based on language and very precise, and law and order and righteousness. At least we were, I guess. Now things have changed quite a lot. Other races are based off other things, right? Yellow, of course, it would be the earth element. Chinese people love the earth element. They love earth and fire, to be honest, but they love the earth element. And then your black would be the water element, probably. Just going on, etc. So, of course, we have elemental imbalances in the West that have been made more imbalanced by change of demographics. Of course, you do have to take that into account. Going back to fat and women, so actually, potentially, if a woman is suffering hormonal issues, developmental issues, or anything like this, or she didn't really develop during puberty, which is the age when it's meant to happen, or even people who, one thing you have to remember is like now that we have the transsexual thing, we've got a bunch of people who probably were on like hormonal blockers and were on the opposite hormones and all this. So, what's the idea, or what's something they could do to help themselves? Potentially you could get fat, or like, not obese, or not like to the point where you can't function, but actually putting on weight would be a thing to soothe and kind of calm your body. I know apparently when people go on like antidepressants, women especially, they do fatten up. People in general, I guess, are just anti-anxieties, I think. I don't know, one of those. antipsychotic things. So that probably, stabilizes and like makes people more yin. And of course, you don't want to be on those because they stunt your emotions pretty much completely. But anyway, so that's an interesting thing to think about. Yeah, everyone wants to be young essentially, and you can kind of tell that like no one wants to almost take responsibility, and we people struggle with that in the West. And again, responsibility is a more earthly quality, one which is seemingly lacking. Again, people having a beard is an earthly quality. It's at the bottom of the or body hair in general. Actually, so it was weird that people are so obsessed with like shaving their body hair. But even actually, if you look at the looks max face, if anyone who knows what I'm talking about, it is the generic face of like a young man or even woman where it has a very sharp chin and the cheeks are shown like the cheekbones, and women will do this with makeup. They'll show the cheekbones, or they'll like do I think it's where they put like lighter makeup, like a streak of lighter makeup, and then it'll be like darker in the background to show like a fake cheekbone. And actually what this symbolizes is a kidney deficiency. The same way the really sharp chin, the middle chin, and then like the kind of really sharp sides of the face. The sides of the face or body is yin, negative, and top and bottom is positive, right? And middle is neutral. That's how if you want to understand directions and elements. So actually, the lower sides are very important. They're like the most yin parts of the body, and people are showing them off in a way that makes them look as though they have a deficiency, right? A yin deficiency. So it's like yin deficiency or kidney deficiency has actually become almost popular as like a look thing. Like people think, oh, that looks nice. And what happens is when you look at one of these people, whether it's a woman who's done that thing, that trick through makeup, because it still actually stimulates the same thing, you'll feel like a pulsation of the kidneys. Now, the reason I believe that this is popular, it's actually a bad pulsation. It's like a deficient, like, oh, geez, where it's kind of like when someone gets angry or snaps and then other people get like anxiety around them, right? It's like, yeah, that. So a lack of, relaxation. I think people do it because kidney deficiency actually makes people aroused, right? Because it's like the kidneys are saying, hey, we need to get some energy. We need to like, I don't want to get too much into, Taoist sexual alchemy, but to summarize it, if a person has sex and they don't come, then they'll build up more essence. But if they do, they will release it, right? So I think that's why people get that insatiable desire, is because they're actually deficient. So they're trying to build up more. So going on, a lot of this Western stuff is trying to almost keep that perpetual teenager state, right? Because as we get older, we become more yin. Everything starts to go down. Now, finally, what this gets into is actually we get into Taoism. The Taoists figured out that the natural cycle is that people kind of start from the head, from heaven, so to speak, from Aries, which is why Aries is the baby, the child, the newborn, right? And then we slowly go down to the feet, which is Pisces, right? Everything goes south, as they say. So when we normally breathe, when we open the belly and we breathe, the energy goes down and it goes into relaxation, right? And we slowly relax. What are kids? They're energetic. They're running around, hyperactive. If they don't want to sit most of the time, girls are a bit better at that, but guys just want to run around. They just want to play and have fun, and while people who are older, it's easier to kind of sit and work, and the older you get, the easier it is to work, assuming you don't have a health issue or anything like that, and especially because you got more experience and whatever. But because you are more yin, more negative, energy wise. Now, what the Taoists did is that they invented reverse navel breathing, which is where you will push in the stomach. So, what are a lot of people doing, right? What are guys who are in the bodybuilder guys? They want the big triangle upper body. They push in the stomach, they push in that. Probably even women do, because no one wants to be seen of as fat. So we have a insecurity, I guess, a female insecurity, and that kind of leads to the West. You know how like you're allowed to have violent games and violent movies and all this kind of stuff, but like sex scenes are not accepted in like Western countries. In Europe, it's a little more, but then in like Asia, it's a lot more accepted, right? This is again, it's all relating to this because we reject, I guess, or we have rejected the feminine. Why we've if we look at like feminism, because it's kind of paradoxical because women have been like ruling the last how many ever years. If you look at like how the courts are kind of stacked against men and all that, you can't really deny that. But it's been the toxic feminine, it hasn't been the good feminine, the nurturing, because we haven't got our positive and negative straight. We haven't kind of healed ourselves. So things are kind of out of whack, so to speak. So, but now we're actually going into a masculine cycle, which ironically will balance out the toxic feminine, or like straighten it out, fix it out. Funny how that works. I would imagine, at least I imagine that's what it'll do. It seems to do that. See what happens. Going on, so the reverse navel breathing, what it does is instead of sending the energy down, it will actually send the energy up to the head. And this is why it spiritualizes you. Spirituality in general is all about sending the energy up, which is why they said, women couldn't cultivate, women couldn't do spiritual practices. Now, actually, women can. It's just that it's not physically healthy for a woman or really a man, to be completely honest. In general, spirituality is not a healthy thing. You are hacking the body, and it kind of assumes that you've already like got the survival aspect down and all that. But women can do this stuff and gain enlightenment or whatever. At least I believe they can. If anyone with the body should be able to, even an animal actually, ironically enough. But the reason why is because if you're not sending your energy down, then they're not going to be able to have children, right? So that's why if you're looking at the Taoist stuff, women stop having their period, they stop menstruating when they do enough of the Yang Taoist practices, which again, it's not physically healthy, but it's something that they've noticed, right? So of course, they push in the essentially reverse navel breathing. It's just breathing like a bodybuilder, breathing like a guy who's trying to hold in his fat gut. that really is it, right? And what it is, it's tension. When you hold tension in the body, you produce positive energy. When you relax, you produce like negative energy, we can think, right? Or you can just think you produce relaxation energy. When you tense, you produce tension energy. Nervous system, more in the nervous system. When you do reverse navel breathing, actually it clears up your head and your nervous system, and you feel like really energetic. And when you're young, right? You're energetic and young, and you're energetic and active. It makes you want to be active, right? So it makes you want to run around. It makes you thinner. It's the same thing if you smoke cigarettes or drink coffee. It is the exact same thing. Coffee is just like a chemical reverse navel breathing. Cigarettes is a next level. It's way more strong, which is why if you use too much caffeine or nicotine, you will get ill eventually. I mean, once you stop taking it, you crash because you burn out all your lower minerals. You burn out your earth element. So what happens is that you are trading your earth element and your water element. Basically, you're raising the kundalini, the lower generative essences and all this kind of stuff, right? To stimulate the upper, which makes you more, kind of young. And again, I don't recommend you do this unless you have like an excess of the earth element and you want more, of the other element, the spiritual element, excuse me. But this is what the Taoists did. This is how they reversed time, and they became like a teenager again, where they were very energetic, right? And that's what, like, pure yang. The hair would go white, and they would become super skinny and super light, and they would become light because the bones would be less dense, and the bones would actually become soft. And this is why they would say, once your bones become too hard, you can't do this. I mean, technically you can, but much more harder because the bones are already set, right? And if they've set, it's almost difficult to get them to realign. At least I've noticed, if you build up a lot of muscle, like if you have like, I had issues with my ribs, rib kind of poking out, and just as I developed muscle around there, it like acted like a corset almost, where it just pulled that rib in, and it took years, but so that your bones can actually, even if they're tough, you can reset them, right? Final point related to like autism spectrum disorders. So I'm talking about functional autism, which a lot of people seem to have, which seemingly and also EMF radiation. Now, EMF radiation, radio towers, cell towers, all this kind of stuff. If you have a phone or a laptop on, you got the wireless on, even just being near things that are electromagnetic will stimulate this transmutation of negative to positive, right? So actually, we are overstimulated in the West, over positive, which is why everyone said, well, in the past everything was better, right? Because it was more, we had our yin and negative stabilized. We had a strong earth center. Why is everyone rushing to just, got to make money, got to just sell my future for today? Why got to get into debt? Why is no one saying, hey, you know what, got to pay off this debt, got to make a future for my kids, got to, how about we, fix the housing issue? How about we fix, society? It's like people aren't thinking in a more conservative, more earthly way because they're almost like forced into a high positive way, which is why I'm thinking, something's going to change, I would imagine, in the future. I don't know, like, because everything's cyclical, right? So if everything was hyper positive, it'll get like hyper negative, which, as I said, ironically is usually brought by men, because men actually stabilize things. Heat will dry things out. So that's how I think of it alchemically. But as I said, people who are like kind of autism spectrum disordered, actually are hyper positive, so they will, and also more modern young people, because they're hyper affected by EMF, are better off seeking the negative element. So not doing reverse navel breathing, not book smacking. I know, unfortunately, if you're a man and you don't follow all this crap, women aren't going to be hyper stimulated and overstimulated by you, so you can end up single and depressed and alone and all that stuff. But it's kind of like, if you want the future of society to be stable and to function and work, then you have to do that over short-term pleasure and such. The same thing if you own a business. It's like if you're doing a bunch of like zins and nicotine and or chewing tobacco or whatever, peptides and all this crap, overstimulating yourself. Short term, it's like, yeah, wow, everything's working, everything's great. Long term, it crashes down, right? So it's like, depending on what situation in your life you're in, you can't take short-term gains, even though everyone wants to be. That's the thing, we cannot accept our age anymore, so everyone wants to go to the past and be young again, have that energy, overstimulate. It's the same thing with men being on testosterone, overstimulating themselves. They can beat off 10 times a day, right? It's just being on a bunch of weird supplements. Trust me, old guys are crazy when it comes to that. But nowadays, the young guys are so burnt out. A lot of them are on it. Same thing with women being on like birth control and all that. That again, that's an overstimulation of the hormones. So it's like, we have to not do that. We have to not do that. It's like that simple. We have to go back to nature. We have to go, or as much as we can, of course, be in harmony with it. Go back to doing things the old, slow, stable ways, and then we can slowly add technologies. It's good to have a balance. I don't think we should go back to being cavemen or go back to being medieval farmers or anything. I think technology is a blessing and we should use it, but an excess of positive stimulation is not good. Right? So anyway, that's bad enough.